Hi guys, Simon Trezellian here. A few of you have been asking me what's going on in the world. As you know, I have pretty much a fair understanding as to military strategy and why we do certain things and why wars are fought. So I thought I would take the time today to just give you a bit of a briefing to show you exactly what has gone on and what probably will be going on as well. There's a certain pattern here, and as you know from my background, I have a fairly informed viewpoint as to what is going on. So with the use of a pretty map and some coloured counters, let's go. Okay, so here's our map of the world. Now, General Wesley Clark once said that there were 7 countries that America was actually going to take out in order to be able to create the peace that it wanted. And those 7 countries were Iraq and Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan and Iran. Okay, so that's what these guys were doing. Now, it just so happened that these 7 nations are largely Shia, so they're the enemies of Saudi Arabia. And as you can see here with Libya and Lebanon and Syria and Iraq and Iran, they're all in a line. That's because they're on the 33rd parallel. The 33rd parallel is very significant in human consciousness. 33 is of course very significant to the Illuminati, and it's very significant to the Freemasons, who have 33 degrees. The 33rd degree parallel is where mankind first started, in the Tigris-Euphrates basin, and it is rumoured that that is where mankind will finish as well. So that's just a bit of a conspiracy theory, but as you can see, it's pretty well borne out. So let's have a look at what actually happened then. So 2001, we had the war in Iraq. Now, why are we going to war on these things? Well, let's have a look at some other parts of the map as well. So let's have a look at where people and countries do not have Rothschild banks, and they're going to be the red dots. So we have Cuba over here. Oh, and Libya as well didn't have a Rothschild bank, and nor did Somalia, and nor did Sudan, and nor did Lebanon, and nor did Syria, and certainly Iraq and Iran, and the last one, North Korea. These people did not have Rothschild banks. So in the war in Iraq erupted, the American forces went in with the coalition and of course defeated Saddam Hussein. We changed the regime, and on day 1 we gave them a Rothschild bank. Excellent. So that's how that started. Now in Afghanistan as well, we had a little problem with Afghanistan. Whilst not necessarily being one of the big 7, we did actually notice that Afghanistan did not have a Rothschild bank. But then of course in 2001 we started that war in Afghanistan, and of course with the new Karzai regime and all of these type of things, we then gave them a Rothschild bank. So that was okay. Now 2006, Lebanon kicks off, not with the Americans but with the Israelis. So Lebanon then starts going to war, and of course part of that process was giving them a Rothschild bank so that they would come into the fold as well. Now after that we had Somalia. So 2009 now we got Somalia, and of course Americans went into Somalia, war kicked off, and Somalia now has a Rothschild bank. So 2011, Syria. So the Syrian civil war erupts and is still going on to this day. One of the major reasons for that is of course the oil pipelines being sponsored by Turkey and or Saudi Arabia, looking to send fuel to Europe so that it doesn't have to go through Ukraine, which of course Ukraine has a war going on there as well, because Ukraine is the way that Russia gets the fuel to Europe at the present time. Now in Sudan, the Sudan war kicked off in 2013. A lot of international aid came through, and of course part of that aid was to give them a Rothschild bank so they could actually have loans to build up the country. Now Libya then kicked off, didn't it? And we had a war in Libya resulting in the death of Gaddafi, and on day one of liberation, guess what? They got a Rothschild bank. So that's how things are at the present time. So we've got all sorts of wars going on. Some of those wars have now gone, but you can start to see the pattern of what is actually happening. And it is all down to fuel and energy and banking resources. So Cuba, we saw last year Fidel Castro has died. So no one's really made a big decision on what's going to happen to Cuba. It is likely now, with the demise of Castro, that there may be a softening, and that Cuba may well come into the fold and take a Rothschild bank. Syria, as part of the partition, which will likely happen now that the Americans are actually on the ground in Syria, it is likely there's going to be a partition, and it is likely at some point the rebuilding of Syria will involve some form of regime change, just like they did with Gaddafi, just like they did with Saddam Hussein, and will involve a Rothschild bank. Of course, the next major one is going to be Iran, seeing what Iran does, and of course you've got the whole nuclear things going on with Iran, and of course over to North Korea, where everything is moving at the present time. We have ships in the area, they're producing nuclear weapons, so we can actually start to see where these areas of conflict are going to be and why we're actually there. So I feel that when you actually see that the way that the world is, you can actually see why you are being told the things that you are being told. You know, where has North Korea started any wars? Never. But now, since Trump has spoken to China, all of a sudden China, who has been the biggest supporter of North Korea, have now started putting troops on the border. The reason for that is North Korea has its major export, which is coal, and its major customer is China, and it's in the north of North Korea where all the coal mines are. So if there was a regime change, if there was some form of aggression against North Korea, it is likely that China would come in as a humanitarian option to secure the northern fields, to secure the people there. That would be the underlying reason for that, and North Korea would probably be partitioned, with many of the people going to South Korea, an extension of that border, and therefore a buffer zone, probably a demilitarized zone of many hundreds of miles, and China would get all the coal that it needs and not have to pay for it. So there you go. So that is me.